Our speaker today is Manager of Social Responsibility at FedEx. She directs and implements the company's community outreach strategy in the areas of disaster relief, safety, environment, education, and diversity in national and international markets. FedEx is a corporation known for delivering the world to our doorsteps, and today's speaker represents the heart of that corporation. Many in the Mid-South know about her magnificent accomplishments, but we know her as the energetic freshman journalism major from Clarksdale, Mississippi, who started taking courses in Brady Hall in 1975. The faculty instantly saw her potential, and we did everything we could to make sure this enormous talent was prepared. She usually was way ahead of all of us. She was the first black female named to the Ole Miss Student Hall of Fame. She was chosen by Glamour Magazine as one of the top 10 college women in the United States. She was on 23 university-wide committees. Our speaker is a charter member of the Ole Miss Women's Council and was inducted into the Alumni Hall of Fame in 1998. 4 years later, she served as president of the Ole Miss Alumni Association. We know today's speaker as a student who was being recruited to outstanding media outlets and corporate entities. When some of our alumni introduced her to leading figures in Washington, she immediately had opportunities to work in the White House. We know that James Meredith was the first African American to enroll at Ole Miss. But we know Rose Jackson Flenorl as a fledgling feature writer at the Commercial Appeal who agreed to come back to Ole Miss to help the university understand the needs of African American students and to help those African American students understand that they could thrive on this campus. We know today's speaker as a person who truly made Ole Miss a vital option for African American students. And we are proud to have one of our own as today's graduation speaker. Please give Rose Jackson Flenorl a warm Meek School welcome.
My first job after I left Ole Miss was with IBM in sales and marketing in the Memphis branch office. After I began work at IBM, I learned that I would be traveling back and forth to Atlanta, Georgia for another year of school. Let me repeat that, another year of school. You see, IBM believed in developing and training their new hires. They want everyone who worked for them to understand the obstacles faced by small business and big business. So as a print journalism major, I found myself surrounded by new college graduates from around the country who were majoring in business, marketing, accounting, engineering, and information systems. We studied inventory control, accounts payable, income and expense reports. We learned how to make effective sales presentations and marketing presentations. And my favorite, COBOL, RPG, and basic programming. Here's the catch. We were tested. To keep your job, you were required to pass each module in the year-long training program. Did I already tell you I was a print journalism major? I was doing great until I got to Module 3, programming. They taught us how to program. If your program ran, you passed. If it didn't, you failed. There was no such thing as getting it almost right. Let me also add that this was during the dark ages, before people had a computer on every desk. Under tremendous pressure, I took the timed RPG programming exam, and I failed. I failed. Did I mention I was the first African American to graduate valedictorian in my high school in Clarkston, Mississippi? I graduated with honors from Ole Miss. I was named to the Student Hall of Fame. I was inducted into Omicron Delta Kappa. I was a Taylor medalist, but I failed that RPG test. My instructors decided to give me an additional day to study, and they said I could take it one more time. They even gave me a little hint: you failed your calculation specifications. I went back to my apartment, I closed my bedroom door, and I called my grandma Lily in Louisville, Mississippi on the phone. I boo-hooed. I mean, alligator tears and a kind of crying you do. And all I wanted to do was my grandmama to pray for me. And she said, it's going to be okay, baby. Pass or fail. Grandma, love you. It's going to be all right. And then she prayed and she prayed and she prayed. I got up, I called one of my friends who was great at programming. She stayed up with me half the night, and we reviewed calc specs. The next day after class, I took the test, and I passed. Y'all clap. That weekend, my father called me, and if you look up Daddy's Girl in the dictionary, you see my picture. We were very close. And he said, your grandmama told me to call and check on you. And with a little jealousy in his voice, he said, why didn't you call your daddy? I said, Dad, I don't mean no harm, but I needed someone who had a hotline to God. I knew your prayer would get through, but not as quick as grandmama's, because she serves on the executive council. Good afternoon. I want to thank Dean Norton for the gracious introduction. When I was a student on this campus, he was my daddy away from home. And my daddy was tough, but Dean Norton was tougher. To the faculty and staff of the Meek School of Journalism and New Media, a special thanks for all that they've contributed to this university, to Charles Overby and Dr. Ed Meek, to the family here and friends, and most important, to the graduates of the amazing class of 2015. Good afternoon. So if you haven't figured it out by now, my first piece of advice to you is, graduates, don't be afraid to fail. Successful people fail. But they accept failure and continue on, knowing that failure is just a natural consequence of trying. I want you to know I went on to have almost 13 great years with IBM on the local, regional, area level. While Dr. Norton did share some of my successes at Ole Miss, he didn't share any of my failures. And let me tell you now, you don't have to worry about failing because nobody ever puts it on the resume. But let me just tell you this. I lost the Camp favorite election my freshman year, but I won my sophomore year. They didn't pick me for Omicron Delta Kappa my junior year, but I got in my senior year. I failed at my first relationship at Ole Miss when I was really fell in love. But I met my husband later, and we've been together 34 years. Richard, where are you, baby? Raise your hand, raise your hand. I lost a Miss Ole Miss election. I don't know why I was not Miss Ole Miss. I'm an honorary Miss Ole Miss now. And for the life of me, I still don't understand why I didn't make the top 10 best dressed. I quote Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, y'all know who Michael Jordan is, don't you? Okay. I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I have lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. So here's a question I'm often asked. How, in the mid-'70s, when there's very little diversity at Ole Miss, why in the world did you choose to come to Ole Miss? My high school guidance counselor had identified me as a candidate for a new program Ole Miss had designed to better recruit students of color. One day, out of the blue, or should I say out of the red and blue, Ole Miss sent me a letter and invited me and dozens of other top African-American students from across the state to visit campus. My best friend from high school and I accepted the invitation for a campus visit, pretty much for one reason. We were excused from high school to travel to Oxford. And that was a big deal in those days. A free trip? What 17-year-old student was going to say no to a free trip and a free get-out-of-class pass for 2 days? After visiting high school students, we were invited to attend a class of our choice, and I picked a journalism class. I was editor of the Clarksdale High School Spotlight. I had my own column, Rose's Rap. And they told us to just sit in the class, be quiet, and listen. But as you can probably guess, I did more than just listen. I asked questions. I asked a lot of questions. That's who I was, and that's who I still am, a curious student of the world. So even as a high school student visiting Ole Miss, I felt at home. I had the best time, and I knew when I left Oxford that day, I was coming back home. The biggest barrier to me coming to Ole Miss? My parents. They were afraid. My daddy might have been worried, but he couldn't have been too surprised. After all, he instilled the principles in me that led me to Ole Miss: courage, self-respect, open-mindedness, and most of all, an insistence on excellence no matter how difficult the circumstances. When I was around 8 years old, my dad and I had gone to visit my grandmother Lily in Lewisville, Mississippi. And on the way back home, we're coming through Ackerman, Mississippi, and I spot an ice cream sign. And I say to my dad, I want ice cream. He pulls over, get out of the car, he grabs my hand, we skip to the counter, and he asks the gentleman behind the counter for a cone of ice cream. And the gentleman says, we don't serve blacks here. My daddy knew the best thing to do was to get back in his car and go home, but I looked at him with those, I know you can get ice cream eyes. And he said to the gentleman, we'll take it from the back. And the gentleman said, we don't serve blacks from anywhere. My daddy said, she's a child, it's a shame that you don't. He basically drags me back to the car. We get in the car, we're not a mile down the road. A cop pulls him over, snatches my daddy from the car, and says, you don't talk back to white people. A younger cop says to him, let him go, there's a child in the car. We're not a mile out of town, my daddy pulls over, and he tries to explain to me what happened and why he couldn't buy me ice cream. And I didn't realize then, but I realized later in life, for a college-educated man with a master's degree who served his country, who served as a teacher and taught students, who paid his taxes not to be able to buy his child ice cream, how much that must have hurt from time to time during his life. But here's what my daddy said to me on that day that made me the person I am today, and I pray to God will always be. He said to me, sweetheart, there are good white people in this world, and there are bad white people in this world. There are good black people in this world, and there are bad black people in this world. But with hard work, a little bit of self-confidence, and faith in God, there is nothing that you cannot do, and I expect no less out of you. So my advice to every student here, it's not going to be easy. You have to work hard. And sometimes even when you work hard, it doesn't work out, but you keep going. Believe in yourself, have self-confidence, and keep the faith. The fact that I can remember so vividly what my daddy said to me that night outside of Ackerman, Mississippi, is the greatest proof I know that words change the world. That night, my daddy freed me from fearing people. At the same time, he raised the bar of expectations. He insisted on excellence regardless of how hard things get. The stories we tell about the world around us, about ourselves and to one another, are conduits for tremendous change. You can look as far away as Nepal or as close as home as Baltimore and see that our world needs storytellers to make change. This is why I went into journalism and mass communications, and I've never looked back or been prouder to be a journalism graduate. Make no mistakes, your words and stories carry the power to make change in the world. Right now in your pocket, You have a mobile phone that gives you more reporting power than the entire television network I had on the day I graduated from Ole Miss. Sure, a job in journalism or mass communications might be harder to come by today, but at the same time, you can't say you're not connected. It's about what you do with those connections that's going to matter. It's about what you do with those connections that's going to matter. The world will always need people who are dedicated to truth-telling, objective, unbiased, and well-informed observers of people and world events. Professionals reporting what they see and hear, with their only agenda being to inform, educate, and shed light on issues that some would prefer to keep in the dark. They call it a career path for a reason. It's a journey, and you won't know how the path ends until you get there. My career has taken me into most of the areas of media and mass communications you can think of integrated marketing and mass communications. I reported for the Delta Democrat Times in Greenville, Mississippi, and the Memphis Commercial Appeal in Memphis, Tennessee. I worked on behalf of journalism organizations and nonprofits. I worked with marketing professionals at IBM and journalists from corporate communications at International Paper and FedEx. I haven't seen it all, but I've sure seen a lot. And I'm here to tell you, no matter where your career takes you, the stories you will write have the power to lift up communities and change lives if you choose to use your gifts. My third and last piece of advice is to be a servant leader. Be willing to help others as others have helped you. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. As Wentz Henderson wrote, the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. When I worked in disaster relief at FedEx and served on the corporate advisory board of the American Red Cross, I learned the two worst things about disaster. The two worst things about disasters. Number one, that it happened at all. But number two, that eventually the media pulls out. When the media stops telling the story, that's when the financial support dries up. That's when volunteers suddenly get harder to find. Stories, just like a package full of food and vital medicine, have the power to save lives. Stories connect us. At FedEx, we say, a connected world is a better world, and I believe that. Reporting and storytelling give the world clarity. You see yourself more clearly. You pay attention to the world. Look what's happening in Ferguson, in Baltimore, and Nepal. Think about the ways you see the world differently today versus the day you first set foot on this campus. The world's a different place, but that's in part because you're a different person. You are prepared. You are ready. I won't get you to say the words next. You have a degree from one of the top programs in this country. Ole Miss has trained you to tell stories, to market stories, to be fearless in the face of the unknown. What better training could there be for meeting the future? Today, you're being given a glorious blank page. You're about to begin work on the most important story you'll ever file as a journalist, the one you write about yourself. The one you write about yourself. Spoiler alert, it's going to be the most important, surprising, and rewarding story you will ever write. I can't wait to see how each and every one of your stories turn out. I feel very fortunate to step back from the microphone and become a part of your audience. I quote Mae West, "You only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough." Thank you very much.